Okay, whenever you're ready, Mayor.
Great. I'd like to call this first meeting of the Board of Estimate and Apportionment to order. Ms. Green, can you please call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Mayor Jones,
Present.
Comptroller Green,
Here.
President Reed,
Here.
all present.
Great, great. I believe we have an agenda, or do we need to approve minutes from the previous meeting? Okay. I believe that we have the agenda for today's meeting. These are items presented for the first time. Item number 1, request from the Comptroller's Office for approval of contracts and leases for various city departments as listed on Exhibit A. Item number 2, request from the Comptroller's Office for approval of intra-departmental and interdepartmental transfers from various city departments as listed on Exhibit B. Item number 3, request from the Comptroller's Office for approval of transfers between projects for capital improvement funds on Exhibit C. Item number 4, request from the Director of Airports for approval of the authorization to destroy listed documents that have reached their retention period for disposal and are eligible for destruction in accordance with the state of Missouri's record retention requirements. Item number 5, request from the Mayor's Office for approval of a transfer of funds in the amount of $2.5 million per ordinance number 71182 from Fund 1410 120-2020 CARE Pandemic 2020 Contingency to the Board of Public Service Fund 1410-633-2021-5659,000 to provide needed repairs to the Justice Center. And item number 6, request from the Mayor's Office for approval to pay an invoice for the United States Conference of Mayors membership from February 1st, 2021 to January 31st, 2022 in the amount of $16,995 from Fund 1010 Center 190 account number 5648,000.
Move for adoption of items 1 through 6 as listed.
Second.
Okay, there is a motion for adoption of items 1 through 6. However, I'd like to
Hold a couple of them.
I'd like to hold item number 5 and get a better explanation. I know Rich Bradley's on the phone. I just want to be brought up to speed on that one.
Okay.
So, President, would you be willing to?
Yeah. I make a motion to adopt items 1. First, I withdraw my original motion. I make a motion to adopt items 1 through 4 and item 6 as listed on the agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded to adopt items 1 through 4 and 6.
Stephanie, call the roll.
Yes, Stephanie, call the roll.
Mayor Jones,
Aye.
Comptroller Green,
Aye.
President Reed,
Aye.
Great.
all in favor.
Motion carries. Okay, item number 5. I believe Rich Bradley is on the phone or is on the Zoom.
Yes, ma'am.
Would you mind bringing me up to speed on this request for transfer of funds for the repairs to the Justice Center?
Yes, ma'am. As you're aware, we're currently working on phase 1 at the Justice Center on locks, doors, and glazing on cells. What this item would do is provide additional funding to continue that work on locks, doors, glazing, jams of the cells, and would also purchase the access control system, the computer system that controls the locks, and the intercom system for the remainder of the project.
Great. And how much is the total amount of the project?
The total amount of the whole project is $13.5 million. This request, I believe, is for 5.5.
Okay, and so that's pretty much the start the project or
Continue.
continue it? Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Bradley? Okay, great. Well, I'd like to entertain a motion for item number, well, I move that item number 5 be approved there a second?
Second.
Great. Ms. Green, please call the roll.
Mayor Jones,
Aye.
Comptroller Green,
Aye.
and President Reed.
Aye.
Great.
All in favor.
Thank you for that, Mr. Bradley. Also, today we will discuss the fiscal year 2022 annual operating budget or operating plan presented by Paul Payne. I believe he is on the Zoom. Mr. Payne, please take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. And Madam Comptroller, Mr. President, I am going to do a screen share, if I can be accommodating here. The presentation. Is that visible to everyone?
Yes.
Presentation, great. Thank you. This is the proposed annual operating plan for fiscal 22. The total is $1,153.6 million. That's an increase of 3.9% of the previous fiscal year. And in the illustration below, you can see where those funds are allocated by funds.
Oh, okay.
The general fund at $511.5 million is a 6.2% increase, and I'm going to get into what the details of that pretty specifically in later pages. The special revenue funds are pretty much flat, and then there's a lot going on there. There are some increases in some of the sales tax funds because the sales tax funds were hit this year with obviously the pandemic, and so they were down, and so we have a gradual recovery in those funds. And there are other funds that utilize fund balances this year as a balancing budget measure. So there are some ups and downs, like all the public safety funds that are sales tax based. The gaming fund is up, the use tax fund is up, but then we have the Convention and Sports Facility Trust Fund, which is also down, and some of the Eco Devo funds, which use fund balances this year. So there's little ups and downs, but overall that category is flat. Same as for the grant funds. Debt service funds up a little bit, reflecting the full year's cost of the Prop NS issue that occurred last year. In the capital funds at $30.1 million, capital fund is highly leveraged with sales tax funds, half-cent sales tax funds, as well as the economic development sales tax and some of the metro parks. So it was hit hard this fiscal year, and given there's a built-in a gradual recovery in sales tax funds, it will be increasing next year, and that's why the increase there at 12.7%. Enterprise funds at $248.4 million, that's up 1.1%. We've actually got a couple things going on there. The airport is down actually $5 million or 3%. Water division is up by 11% because, and if you look at their budget, they're actually budgeting from some of their contingency funds to do some needed repairs. So there's about $7.9 million in their budget just to accommodate some of the repairs to the system itself. So it's over and above their recurring budget. Internal service funds, those are funds that are departments charge each other. The biggest amount being the health insurance fund, which is up about 7.9% this coming fiscal year. And you can see the chart below. The general fund is still the largest of all those categories at 44% of the total budget. So in terms of these next few slides, I wanted to go over a little bit more in detail about how we're doing on revenues this fiscal year, because as you know, with the pandemic, there was a lot of uncertainty going in. And so we had to be careful about how we budgeted the revenues and whether or not we were going to, what kind of drops we were going to see. In the first chart, you see the earnings tax. Now the earnings tax had the issue with it is that we had some deferred receipts from last fiscal year because of the IRS extension that fell into this year. So it's a little skewed. It's up 5%, but that includes the deferred taxes from the prior year. And I put a note on there reflecting what the change would be without that increase in funds from the deferred taxes. So it would be down about 4.3%. So the results, however, are still tracking better than budget. Actually, we had knocked it down significantly, about a 15% drop overall in the withholding piece. And so we're doing a little better than that year to date. But just to give you an idea, I look back in the last recession, the drop in the worst part of the last recession, FY09 was 2.2%. And FY10 was a negative 1.5. So that 4.3, even though it's better than estimate, is a significant drop. So make no mistake, it was hit. It just wasn't as bad as estimated and going in. And a similar story for this payroll tax collections. You can see year to date, the actual results are down 7.8%. Now we had estimated 15%, so it's doing better than estimated. But looking back to the last recession, we were down in FY10 about 6.9%, but we haven't seen anything drop 7.8% to that extent. So it was a severe drop, but it's just not as bad. So I guess the story here is that the numbers were bad, but we were prepared for worse on these two revenues. Now the same story cannot be said of the sales tax. If you look at the sales tax year to date, going back to our mid-year report, it was actually up a little bit, and it had not dropped as far. If you look at the second quarter, it was down about 15.8%. But then the inklings from the first month of the third quarter sort of indicated we're going to be in for a rough quarter, and we absolutely were. The third quarter results were down 35% on sales tax alone, and our estimate was 20%. So that brings the overall for fiscal year pretty close, but it's still trailing. It's down 26.6% for the year, and we had estimated 24.6%. So it is trailing estimates for the fiscal year by a bit. And I should point out, there's been a lot of talk about the earnings tax because it's 35% of our general fund budget. But sales tax actually is in multiple funds. And if you add up all those multiple funds, it's actually, the size is comparable to the earnings tax when you include them all, including things like Metro and all. But it's a significant source of revenue to the city. And so we got to keep an eye on how sales tax goes forward. And the local use tax, it's actually been the reverse. Local use tax has actually outperformed estimates. It was up almost 30% for the third quarter, whereas the estimates were projecting a decline of 5%. So it is outperforming estimates. Unfortunately, with the use tax, it's not as much as the sales tax. It offsets a portion, but it's not as much to offset the full drop. And I think going forward, the question for the use tax is going to be where the new normal is. We saw, if you look back in May and June of last year, you did see a surge at the beginning of the pandemic of a couple $1 million each of those months. And so the question is going to be, can you repeat that? I'm expecting that there's going to be a sort of a drop off from a year over year comparison. And then going forward, the question where we've got some built-in increases as the sales tax recovers, the question will be, will that just pull from the use tax, or whether the behavior on purchases is a permanent one. So a lot of dust needs to settle on both of these taxes going forward. And finally, the hotel and restaurant taxes, they are definitely the hardest hit. You can see fiscal year to date on the hotel is down over 74% through the third quarter. And you can look at the progression there. The first quarter was down over 80%. It was down 72% in the second quarter. So it's been getting a little better, but these are still dire numbers when you look at it. There's nothing comparable to that in prior years. We'd estimated down fiscal year to date is 62, and it's down over 74%. The restaurant tax is similar, although not as dire. It's down over 49% year to date. We had it down just a little over 50, so it's doing a little better than estimated. But again, these are significant declines you would not see in any prior recession. So what does that mean in terms of looking at revenue in total? This is sort of an illustration that includes not only the general fund, but a lot of the major sales tax and other tax funds that are included in this budget. If you can see, I go back to FY19 because FY19 is going to be recognized as the base pre-pandemic year that the American Rescue Act references. It says whatever the full fiscal year prior to the pandemic. So that's going to be the base for which we compare how revenues are doing subsequently. And so you have original estimates in FY21. FY21 through the third quarter, we're actually now on the general fund side, we're actually to the good by about $6 million. Of course, the fourth quarter is pending, so you don't know what the final number is going to be. But if you look at these three columns, I wanted to emphasize, we know what actual FY20s were. And based on on the FY19 actuals, we're about 24 million below that. Now, not all of that's pandemic related, but it's pretty close. And if you remember my third quarter estimate from last year, that was in the 529 category or 529 territory as well. So it's a pretty good base to compare. And it shows you there's about $24 million off. Now going forward, even with the revised estimates, you're still below, still over $60 million short of your FY19, and cumulatively you're over $80 million short. And then for estimates for FY22 going forward, while the shortfall is getting smaller because you're going to resume growth, the cumulative difference is still over $120 million using the FY19 base. And I should point out, this is only for the budgeted funds. This does not include the Metro sales tax, as well as some other taxes collected by non-city entities. So the revenues are, while a little bit better than estimated, are still significantly below pre-pandemic levels. So that brings us to the FY22 general fund budget. Going forward, again, we need to accommodate both some limited increases as well as some of the one-time measures we took this year to balance, which we can't do a second year, and a portion of the American Rescue Plan Act funds to maintain the balance. So starting with the budget at $481.6 million, that was this year, currently tracking above estimate of about $6.4 million. And then we've got revenue growth at about 33.9%. And again, that's after the accounting for those deferred taxes that were part of this year's budget. That gets you a revenue base of $494.1 million. Now, starting with this year's budget, we have 481.6, and I broke out some of the one-time balancing measures from the departments just to sort of highlight them because they are not really increases in the budget. They are tools that we use to balance this year's budget that needed to be offset. Some of those were the debt and lease payments in citywide accounts that were charged to other funds, capital and economic development funds of $7.7 million. We had a use of a health insurance fund balance. So you're going to see the health insurance lines and most of the departments go up, and that was $7.4 million. And then you had some other special fund balance offsets in PDA, the Parks Division, Circuit Attorney, Human Services, amounting to a couple $1 million there. So that totals about $17.4 million there, just right off the bat. So that's something that we have to accommodate in the general fund budget. Now, in some of the larger budgets, the police department, they have their regular matrix step increases offset with some attrition and then normal health insurance and things like that. That comes into a little under $1 million. We do have the body cameras full cost this year. The previous year, it had been encumbered. There was an encumbered amount from the prior year. So in this year, we do have to budget that full cost. And it's $1.6 million in non-personnel. There are some personnel costs as well, about another $900,000 or so. Police retirement costs are down about $2.6 million. So our contribution is going down this year. And then the police department is scattered across a number of funds, and some of which are increases, some of which are decreasing. That offsets the general fund costs of about $800,000. So there's a net decline there, about $1 million. Fire department and fire pension, some of the same issues or some of the same costs is associated with police with the matrix steps and some attrition. Although they have, as well as health insurance, they also have some workers' comp increases and I believe some overtime increases and fuel costs of about $1.6 million. And the fire retirement system, the old fire retirement system, there is an increase in the contribution by $1.9 million. So that's a total increase of $3.5 million for the fire department and fire pension. Now for corrections, another large department that I'm sure you're all interested in. Just in establishing a base budget for corrections. As you know, they had been underspending their salaries this year, but we wanted to accommodate some increases in the operations. So we took some decreases from salary savings, and there were increases in benefits and medicals and some of the meal contracts, as well as there was a request for a security contract to supplement staffing. And that was that. So with those increases, it was about a $300,000 increase just for your base budget. And so that was just pretty much the status quo base budget. But with this budget going forward, this proposes accommodating the MSI closure as requested. So this is a consolidation. This would be consolidating all personnel to the City Justice Center, which would be a net cut of 90 vacant positions and not including the security contract. That would be a reduction of $3.1 million. Now, in place of that $3.1 million, what this does is adds $1.4 million for contractual detainee housing for those for the capacity that's not ability to be absorbed at CJC, and provides also a correctional investigation unit of 5 positions over the Civilian Oversight Board for about $300,000. It gives PDA about $150,000 for re-examining the MSI facility and for potential future uses. And then also the bigger increase is for a supportive reentry program added to the health director in the general fund for $1.3 million. So those changes were calculated to offset each other. So that's a major change in the Department of Corrections, which would be taking place during FY22. In terms of other departments, of course, we have to budget the civilian pay increase this year, which was a 3%. Typically in the coming fiscal year, we don't budget those as it comes out because it's based on anniversary dates. So it's about 1.5% that most departments need to absorb that. But last year was 3% and that raises the base. So that's about a $3.1 million increase. We are seeing an increase in employee retirement costs, $2.3 million. That doesn't include police and fire above. And then the health insurance increase, the net increase, not including that fund balance, was 7.6%. That's about a $700,000 increase. In citywide accounts, which is that's Department 190. These are general accounts for increases, not specific to a department. The enterprise center lease is up by $1 million. That's the normal schedule. That's the actual schedule of that lease that was passed in ordinance a few years ago. However, the Kiel Center debt, we're making our last payment this current fiscal year, so that would be a decline of $800,000. The convention center debt, you're going to, as you recall, we issued $105 million issuance for the convention center improvements earlier this fiscal year. And that's a $2.5 million increase, but that's structured around the decrease in the dome payments. And we have one more payment this fiscal year on the debt, and so there was going to be a decline in the dome payments of $2.5 million. These other items, smaller items, assessor subsidy, we used a balance last fiscal year of about $200,000. Workers' comp is up a little bit, another $200,000. And then next year, we are not anticipating a trans issuance. We usually budget interest costs for that, and that was a $200,000 decline. Other changes by departments, another big, if there's another, one of the bigger changes, it's for the ERP system, which is the new accounting system. There are licenses and security charges for that, about $1.9 million in the general fund. Personnel, they had some promotional testing in the current fiscal year that's not repeated, and they also had some attrition savings. That's about a $400,000 reduction. City councilor has some legal case software. That's about 3 positions. And then they also have some positions that were supportive of the body camera program. And the comptroller's office has $150,000 for a telecom audit and some insurance premium increases. That's about a $2.1 million increase overall for that category. Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, not much change there, although we did have the full resumption. If you remember last year, because of the pandemic, we did not have lifeguards fully funded because the pools weren't open. So that we need to provide for that this year. And then some workers' comp offsets. We're actually less this year than prior years. That's about $200,000 reduction. In the judicial offices, the circuit court and the juvenile division includes the full year cost of the raise the age pending that implementation. That's that state statute that provided for requiring that juveniles of 17 years or younger were included and tried as juveniles. And so that's about a $300,000 increase in that budget. It does include about a $360,000 for electronic monitors in the Department 311 budget, and was previously grant funded. That was a way of keeping the population of the detention centers down. So that's included in their general fund budget this year. And the sheriff has $150,000 in training and 5 new deputy positions as approved by the courts in their budget. In the Department of County Offices, the Board of Elections with no scheduled elections, that's every other year. That's a decrease of $1.2 million. And the medical examiner has seen increased services provided this year, and contractual increases of about $300,000 or so. In the street department, the director's office is proposing a communications GPS monitoring system for his service fleet. Prior, they used to have a way that you could download data, service data, at the end of the day. This would be more of a live service where you know where the vehicles are located on a live basis. So that's a $130,000 increase in their budget. And towing streets and refuse, there were some salary adjustments for refuse, as I know they're having difficulty retaining their equipment operators. So there was some pay adjustments there, and as well as fuel adjustments of about $500,000 in those three divisions combined. The health division, the director's office, most of the funding for the health divisions in the use tax, but this includes the cops and clinicians programs. Last year was proposed as they had proposed it as a bunch of personnel items, but ended up being a contractual item. And it was actually lower after some startup costs of about $530,000. So that is what's in the health department's general fund budget. And then you have the Board of Public Service, and the President's office included the funded deputy position. There was some change about how some of those separately funded positions that are special fund projects are funded. It used to be contained in a Fund 1116 as sort of a holding fund. We thought it was simpler just to put those in the general fund and then charge them directly to those funds. So that's not actually an increase. It's just an offset of how those are budgeted. In the facilities management, you've got a reduction in the utility cost, but you have a DNR loan payment, which pays off some of the improvements that are efficiency. They are supposed to provide efficiency over the years, energy efficiency, offsetting that cost. And then you did see us increase in some of the steam costs this year. So the net cost increase was $300,000. Equipment services division, fleet costs would be up by $200,000. So that brings you a total of about just under $30 million increase with a base budget of $511.4 million, which leaves you a budget gap of about 17.3. And this budget proposes using the revenue replacement provisions of the American Rescue Plan Act to cover that difference. And I should point out when I was going through this, that 17.3 is very close to some of the total of that one-time resolution, one-time measures we took last year. So it's basically being in use, making up for the difference in some of the revenues that we have not made up since the start of the pandemic, which is what was one of the intents of the Rescue Plan Act itself. Looking at general fund revenue, you can see that the earnings tax is estimated at 177.9. That's a decline of 5.6%. But just keep in mind that that's a decline over this year's, which included some of the deferred taxes from last year, which is about $13 million or so in deferred taxes that from FY20. Property tax estimated 66.7 million. It's a 1.5% increase. Sales tax is been budgeted to gradually increase over the next number of months and quarters, starting with about a 20% reduction in the first quarter and slowly increases over the year, such that it would increase by 18% when the year is done. However, it would still be about 12.1% below the FY19 estimate. And then you have payroll tax of $40.3 million. It's a 2.8% increase over the revised estimate for FY21, but actually still, and actually excess of the FY19 level. FY20 was a strong year, and so that it's still below that amount. Franchise utility tax, that took a big hit this year. I've got a small recovery there, but again, that is significantly below FY19 levels. And intergovernmental funds as well, at $23.3 million are below FY19 levels, though we do expect to see an increase there. One of the major hits was in EMS receipts, which were down. Transports were down. We do expect a recovery in those receipts next year. Departmental fees and fines of $56.9 million, up slightly, 1.1%. We didn't see much of a decline in departmental receipts. Mainly, you'll see that actually business and building permits were actually up this year. So that's something that offsets some of our other declines. So you don't see much growth there, but though it's still below the fiscal 19 level. And then other accounts, We do expect some recovery. These are transfers in, mostly the restaurant and hotel taxes that we get from the C&T fund and the Convention and Sports Facility Trust Fund. And you can see the over and above that is the revenue replacement funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. Now, I should point out that the difference here is that from previous years is that if these revenues outperform, then you don't need to draw these funds. So it's unusual in that what the American Rescue Plan Act gives you is sort of a safety net you didn't have before, and that if you do exceed revenues, then you would not need to draw into that revenue replacement. Of course, if something else, the shoe drops on some other development that hits our revenues, then of course you need to draw more. But that's the thinking behind that those revenues. And of course, there's your illustration of what portion of general fund revenues. Earnings tax is at 35% of that total. I won't go into too much detail, having discussed this already, but here's the allocations as they exist by department. Of course, the general government, 13.4%, that includes the ERP system, that $1.9 million cost associated with that. That's why that's up. And the finance includes both the audit of telecom as well as some of the increases in insurance. The big increase you see in non-departmental, that's some of that reallocated debt service costs that are going back into the general fund and some of the debt changes there. Judicial offices includes, again, the raise the age provision, as well as some of that electronic monitoring provision. County offices is down again because of the election board. And then the bigger increase in health and human services, that reflects the new unit for the reentry program, supportive reentry program that came out of the Department of Public Safety. So the overall budget, $511.5 million, would be a 6.2% increase. Some of the special funds, as I mentioned earlier, the local use tax, that was up 23%, revised at $41.5 million. It's a $5.3 million over original estimates. The proposal for FY22 is $39.4 million. That includes appropriating some of the additional funds there existing in the fund balance. That's affordable housing allocated at $5 million. The healthcare trust fund also allocated at $5 million, and the building demolition, a full allocation of $3 million. If you remember last year, we didn't fully allocate that. It was only $1 million, so this is a $2 million increase over the prior fiscal year. And the other funds the other departments that are funded in there are in the excess use tax portion is refuse at $800,000, housing conservation at $2.5 million, police at $19.8 million. That's actually slightly down from this current fiscal year. The health division, $8.6 million, which includes some increases in positions, and then human services at $500,000. In the economic development sales tax fund, as all other sales taxes, it's down 26% year to date. It's revised estimate at $15.7 million, and it's actually trailing estimates by about a little over $500,000. It's $0.6 million. The FY22 estimate is $18.5 million, but there are also some balances there that are being reappropriated. This is which, if you recall, the ordinance specifies that 60% of that should go to transit. The budget for the transit fund includes $1 million for continuing the transit study, which wasn't spent this year. That's $11.1 million. I should point out that the end of this fiscal year, there will be about $40 million accumulated in that fund. So, and with the additional funds projected for the next year, it would be up to $50 million. So obviously there are some funds accumulated there, and the disposition of which will need to be determined going forward. Neighborhood stabilization gets 10% of that, plus that goes to PDA and CDA. They are also reappropriating $2.1 million, and for a total budget of $4 million. Workforce development, which is Slate and Human Services, 10% of that allocation is $1.8 million. Then we have public safety infrastructure of 10%, offsetting some of the 911 system costs, as well as SEMA's mass notification program, and some cameras for BPS at $350,000. I should note that in the budget submitted from the board, that it's still $1 million remains unallocated in that account. So that can be allocated at some point in this budget process. And 10% of that, the economic development sales tax, is allocated to the city's capital fund. That's another $1.8 million. So there's the estimate, the total budget of $19.6 million. Another special fund, Prop P, it's comprised of two sources. This is a sales tax of $18.5 million and a use tax portion of 4.6, at total revenue of $22.6 million. And the sales tax portion, as I mentioned, as other sales taxes were, is trailing estimates. So in the police department, we actually have a negative balance we need to make up for, and that gets 66%, and that total budget is $11.5 million. Fire department actually had a beginning balance in that account, and so they are fully allocated at $5.2 million. The circuit attorney gets a 6% share of the sales tax portion of the Prop P funds, and that's $1.1 million. So that's total allocation of $17.8 million. And the use tax portion allocated also according to ordinance, 25% for after school and jobs, youth jobs at $463,000, an increase over this year, and the youth cadets $700,000, both in the Department of Public Safety. The circuit attorney's share is 7.7%, which includes a $227,000 balance. That is to pay for staff and as well as pay increases and contractual costs of the office of $600,000. Recreation programs of $435,000 and recreation programs of 25%, including $435,000 balance. That's about a $1.5 million budget for recreation. Building demolition gets 17.3% of the proceeds, and that's $800,000. And then social works and mental health, that includes 25%, as well as a balance there of for a total of $1.8 million. So the use tax portion of Prop P is budgeted at $5.8 million total. In terms of the capital budget, the total budget is $30.1 million. That's an increase of $3.4 million at 12.7% of the previous fiscal year. As I mentioned, this capital improvements budget is funded heavily with sales taxes, so it was particularly hard hit this fiscal year. However, with the gradual assumption of a gradual increase in sales tax base over next year, the total budget is projected to see an increase. I should point out that both ward capital and recreation capital accounts are fully allocated, unlike the previous year, and you can see where the allocations are. I also point out that even with it all fully allocated, some of the restrictions on the capital budget we have each year is about 54% of this budget is allocated towards existing debt service, both in citywide debt as well as some of the parks debt and the police improvements, which are all debt service accounts. In terms of personnel changes, you can see overall total funds were down by 105 positions. A big chunk of that decrease is in the general fund because of the elimination of the vacant positions associated with corrections. There are also some increases in the general fund as well. As I mentioned, like the sheriff's department is up by 5 positions, and some shifting positions that you see decreases, like BPS, which is down about 10 positions. The special fund shifted up to the general fund, 9 positions net. So some of that is moving up to the general fund as well. Grant funds are down by 14 positions, 10 positions related to the police department with an expiring hiring grant, and the enterprise funds are down by 5. I believe 4 of those are on the airport, and one of that, one position is down in water. And this is just a long-term illustration of the trend in positions. We're still down by about 291 positions compared to where we were in FY12. That's 221 down from in the general fund. Pension costs include this just sort of an illustration every year to see how we were doing on pensions. Where we've been sort of after the reforms of the last 10 years, we've sort of been steady, although this year we're seeing another increase of about $4.8 million. And you can look at the detail below. But what that tells you is that while the police retirement system actually was down $2.5 million, we do have an increase in the fire retirement system of about $2.1 million and $5.1 million in ERS. So we are seeing that creep up this year, particularly with ERS. The increase went from 13.1% of pay to 15.4% of pay. And on the next slide, you can see where we stand in terms of status of funding. 80% being generally considered healthy funding amount. We're close to that, although it's been dragging a little bit. And you'll see with ERS, the actuarial basis of 77.6, that's close to the 80%, although market basis we're down below that. What that means is there are some losses that have yet to be recognized in the actuarial basis. That's a smoothing effect. So that's something you got to keep an eye on. FRS, that's the old frozen fire retirement system. It's over 90%. It was 93.4% on an actuarial, 90% on the market basis. FRP, which is the new system, that's 73.5% and 73.7% market and actuarial basis. That's actually pretty good considering that the system is only 8 years old. So that has seen some steady progress in terms of funding. The police retirement system on an actuarial basis is 81.4%, although that dips below a little bit of 80% when you get to the market basis. So that's a total of about $502 million in unfunded liabilities. And so while it's not sort of funded status is not bad, it's close to 80%. The cost per employee still remains high. How we've been doing on reserves, we've been making progress over the last several years and getting our reserves up to over 10% of our general fund budget. And that's where we were. We did not anticipate drawing on the funds. This year's budget was not planning on drawing on the fund balance reserve, but of course they were available should the outlook have worsened. We don't anticipate that to occur. Of course, this year, we still have the fourth quarter pending, and looking ahead to this year, so I've not adjusted. We were at $51.7 million. That's just over 10% of the projected budget. In looking for guidance from both GFOA, what other cities are doing, they always project from a cash basis standpoint, they would suggest 2 months of regular general fund operating expenditures. That would be something like a 16% reserve level. So we've definitely improved over the years, and so that it's those kind of and that's the kind of thing that rating agencies look at, and they've knocked us in the past when we were lower for not being prepared with fund reserves. And so that's something we also need to keep an eye on and continue making progress on. This next slide is just, as I mentioned, other than the funds that we have incorporated to offset some of the revenue gap in the current year's budget, we have not really addressed the $500 million plus that we do anticipate in giving and receiving from the American Rescue Plan Act. So that is to come. And GFOA has issued some guidance to act as guiding principles. And I wanted to include a slide here just for things to consider as we consider the allocation of those funds. They point out that, first of all, that it's the temporary nature of the funds, so they are non-recurring. So in trying to look for applications of the funds, we also want to focus on programs or expenditures that are also non-recurring, so that once the funds disappear and after FY24, that we don't leave ourselves with ongoing commitments. And I underline a couple of things: maintaining a structural balance. So we need to make sure that while this will get us over the hump until revenues get back to where they were pre-pandemic, that we are also focused on maintaining that structural balance where recurring revenues meet recurring expenditures. And they also suggest that investment in critical infrastructure is particularly well suited for the use of what they're calling ARPA funds, because it is non-recurring. So I would expect that some portion of these funds would be allocated to address some of our long needed capital infrastructure. They also suggest when we look at working with other partner agencies that we have an idea about what other funds are out there in addition to the funds that the cities are getting, so that it's coordinated. So that, for instance, like say Metro or other agencies have got specific carve-outs from the ARPA funds, that those, as we participate and look to participate with them on planning the use of funds, that we take that into account, and so we get the best bang for our buck when planning those funds. And then we also mentioned, basically, it says take time and careful consideration in the allocation of the funds. Again, they're going to be coming out in two tranches, one this year, one next year. And so I would expect that some portion of those funds would be incorporated in this budget bill before it's finally adopted. Some of it may be incorporated in supplemental appropriations later this fiscal year, and then some would be in the subsequent budget ordinance and subsequent appropriations. So we do have time to consider thoroughly and thoughtfully how we allocate those funds. So to recap, the total fiscal 22 budget's $1,153.6 million. It's a 3.9% increase from the prior fiscal year. The general fund budget, $511.5 million, is a 6.2% increase. It does assume gradual recovery in revenue as the pandemic wanes, but it's supplemented with $17.3 million in American Rescue Plan Act revenue replacement funds. Some of the general fund highlights include proposed closure of the medium security institution, with $1.4 million allocated for contractual detainee housing and $1.8 million for other programs, including the Correctional Investigation Unit and funds for supportive reentry. The police department budget includes the full cost of the body camera program. That includes the $2.7 million in personnel and contractual accounts. And the Information Technology Systems Agency includes about a $2 million cost of the licenses and related cost of the new accounting and payroll system known as the ERP. Revenues to special and capital funds assume also a gradual recovery. The ward and recreation capital accounts are fully allocated. And again, while the portion of the funds are utilized in the budget, the majority of the fund allocations from the ARPA, the Rescue Plan Act, are yet to be determined. Of course, we will be, a lot of uncertainties remain. We've got lingering effects of the pandemic. And so we will be sort of finding out, a lot of dust needs to be settled in terms of where our new revenue base is, particularly with sales and use taxes, and in terms of the earnings tax as well, employment and payroll taxes in this post-pandemic environment. So there is still a lot of uncertainty remaining going forward that we'll have to keep an eye on. And that concludes the presentation, and I'm available for any questions. And all of this information will be posted online following today's meeting.
Great, thank you, Paul. Are there any questions for Paul?
No, I don't have any questions for him.
Madam Comptroller?
I want to say thank you, Paul, but I want to go to page 13 and the total revenue number.
Sure.
I noticed that was, is that rounded to be 23 million? That Prop P?
Yeah, that is, it is rounded to the nearest tenth of a.
Okay, so that's a 23 million. And then the sales tax portion and the use tax portion, those are just rounded roughly 23 million.
Yeah, some of these funds also have not only the base revenue, but they're also appropriating some balances. You'll see some, so it's in addition to the 25% or the, so for the rec programs, you got the additional 25%, but it also includes $435,000 in a balance there. And that's how you get to the 1.5 million.
Got it. Okay, just wanting to check the numbers.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. And you guys did a pretty good job. I mean, it's a lot to take in with the American Rescue Plan. So we got a lot more work to do here. But from what I see, it's a great job.
Great. Any other questions for Paul or any other discussion?
Nope, I move to adjourn this session of the Board of E&A unless we have something else.
One more
Well,
thing.
I think do we accept this presentation? I know we don't adopt the budget at this time, but do we accept the presentation?
We can, or we can wait till after the neighborhood public hearing.
Yeah, I was going to suggest.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I don't recall any, in the past, you've done it both ways. I don't recall any formal action required today. I do know we do have the public hearing on Friday, and then we also have to work out the schedule for any potential amendments going forward for next week. I know, so we have to nail that one down as well. So I don't know if there's any formal action you need to take today.
Great. Well,
What is your pleasure, Madam Mayor?
I would propose that we don't take any formal action today. and wait till after the public hearing. But I did want to mention that in light of Paul's last slide about the Recovery Act, and making sure that we take careful time and consideration on how we spend those funds, I am putting together an ad hoc committee of several community members to talk about how to allocate those funds, or just to come up with a plan to allocate them, not to allocate them in particular. So I know I spoke with you, Madam Comptroller, about your participation, and President Reed, I'd like your participation as well, or someone from, or a designee from your office, just so that we can all stay in sync on this process. We're just trying to get as much community input as possible. The committees, it's ad hoc. Again, it's about 20 people or so from the community, and we're just going to discuss possibilities of spending the funds within the parameters as set by the bill, and any other further guidance from Treasury.
All right, that sounds good. That sounds good. And as you know, I have a placeholder bill in place that we need to begin working on, so that'll work.
Right, great. And I did receive a copy of that today, so
Okay.
thank you for that. And so just look forward to hearing from Noel in my office about our next meeting. And thank you. So at this point, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move that we adjourn this session of the Board of E&A.
Second?
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Have a
Great.
good day, everybody. All right. Thanks.
You surprised my first E&A meeting.
Woo.
Yay.
First
Congratulations,
one
Madam Mayor.
down. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Everyone,
to put
have a great day.
All right. See
You
y'all.
too.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.